For decades, people have repeated the same prediction. As science advances, religion will disappear. As education spreads, faith will collapse. And for a while, it seemed like this was happening, especially with Gen Z, the youngest generation of adults. These are the people born after 1997, raised with smartphones in hand, growing up in a world of instant access to information. They've watched YouTube debates, scrolled through skeptical subreddits, and heard arguments that religion is outdated, irrational, and unnecessary. So naturally, experts predicted that Gen Z would become the first truly atheist generation. The final proof that religion was a relic of the past. But something unexpected is happening now. Gen Z is quietly returning to faith. Not in massive waves or viral religious movements, not necessarily through organized religion, but in personal, subtle, individual ways. Many young people are rediscovering belief. And they're doing it despite growing up in a culture that told them faith was pointless. This trend is real, and it's raising serious questions. If the world is becoming more scientific, more modern, and more connected, why are young people turning back toward belief? Let's unpack this carefully, because the answer is deeper than just emotion. It's about human psychology, meaning, and something science can't replace. First, the data. A recent 2025 report from The Times in the UK revealed that church attendance among young adults has surged by nearly 50% since 2022. In the US, a Harvard Divinity School survey found that 33% of Gen Z now say they believe in God or a higher power, up from just 25% 2 years ago. Even globally, the Pew Research Center found that religious affiliation is increasing in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, regions where Gen Z is the fastest growing population group. But it's not just about numbers, it's about motivation. Why would a generation raised on skepticism, logic, and science be drawn back to faith? To understand this, we need to talk about the crisis of meaning. Gen Z is the most anxious, stressed out, and depressed generation in modern history. According to the CDC, over 42% of young adults report persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. That's the highest rate ever recorded. Social media has created a world of constant comparison. You scroll through highlight reels of other people's lives, thinking you're the only one struggling. Technology has made everything faster, but not necessarily better. We're more connected digitally, but more isolated emotionally. And most of all, many young people feel like life has no ultimate purpose. They're told, directly or indirectly, that they're just accidents of evolution, that life has no higher meaning, that when you die, it's game over. Now imagine living with that framework while battling depression, loneliness, and anxiety. It creates what psychologists call the existential vacuum, a hollow feeling that nothing matters. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote in his famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, that when people lose purpose, they don't just get bored, they fall into despair. They lose the will to live fully. And that's what's happening to many young people today. They've tried replacing belief with self-improvement, therapy apps, meditation, productivity hacks, and endless entertainment. But something is still missing, because the human heart is wired for meaning beyond survival. We don't just want to live, we want to know why we're alive. That's where faith comes in. Belief isn't just about rituals or traditions. At its core, it's about answering the biggest questions. Why am I here? What is my purpose? Is there justice beyond this life? What happens when I die? Atheism, in its most common form, usually answers these with, "We don't know," and that's fine. But for many people, especially those facing emotional struggles, that answer feels empty. Science can tell you how your brain works, but it can't tell you why love matters. It can explain how the universe expanded, but it can't tell you what beauty is, or why you cry when you lose someone you love. That's where materialism, the belief that only the physical world exists, runs into a wall. Young people are realizing this. They've tried secular worldviews, but they still feel the deep human need for transcendence. This is not weakness, it's part of human nature. In Islamic thought, this is called the fitra. The fitra is the natural state of the human being, an inner compass pointing toward God, purpose, and ultimate truth. Even if someone grows up rejecting religion, the fitra remains quietly inside. And when life's distractions fade, when pain hits, or questions about death arise, that inner voice starts whispering again. It says, there must be more than this. And young people are listening. They're asking questions like, if life is meaningless, why does injustice make me so angry? If we're just chemicals, why do I feel guilty when I do something wrong? If death is the end, why do I long for eternity? Atheism doesn't answer these well without borrowing from religious ideas. For example, take morality. Many young people are passionate about social justice. They care about fairness, equality, and protecting the vulnerable. But if life is just survival of the fittest, where does this deep sense of justice come from? Why do humans care about the weak and oppressed when evolution rewards the strong? Philosophers like Nietzsche tried to explain this by saying morality is a social invention. But that explanation leaves most people unsatisfied because our sense of right and wrong feels objective, not invented. Then there's consciousness. Materialism says your mind is just neurons firing. But if that's true, why do we experience love, loyalty, and sacrifice as more than survival instincts? Why do we create art, write poetry, and long for something beyond this life? And of course, there's death. Atheism says, when you die, you're gone. End of story. But humans, everywhere, across all cultures and times, intuitively believe in an afterlife. Even societies that reject organized religion still hold funerals, speak of loved ones watching over us, and believe in some form of continued existence. Why? Because the idea of eternity is part of our natural design. As the Quran says, indeed, it is in the remembrance of God that hearts find rest. That doesn't mean blind faith. It means recognizing that pure material explanations don't satisfy the deepest human questions. Even famous secular thinkers are starting to admit this. Jordan Peterson now speaks openly about the psychological necessity of God. Sam Harris, once a leading atheist, spends more time discussing consciousness and spirituality than denying religion. Because the truth is, atheism may answer some scientific questions, but it struggles with human ones. It can explain the how of life, but not the why. And young people today are hungry for the why. That's why Gen Z is quietly returning to faith. Not because they're rejecting science, not because they're brainwashed, but because they've realized that science alone isn't enough. Humans are not just data processors or survival machines. We're beings wired for meaning. And when that meaning is missing, life becomes unbearable. So, whether it's through prayer, meditation, or just contemplating the universe, more and more young people are opening the door back to belief. They're not always calling it religion. Some say spiritual, but not religious. Some explore mindfulness, some look into philosophy, and some return to traditional faiths. But the trend is clear. The idea that atheism is the inevitable future of humanity is crumbling. Because no matter how modern the world becomes, the need for meaning doesn't disappear. It's part of who we are. And maybe, just maybe, that's not a flaw in human design. Maybe it's the greatest sign that we were made for something more.